Some people carry a quietness that isn't peace. It is an ancient, invisible weight. It's the silence of a house where the lights are on, but the doors have been locked from the inside for years. If you are one of those people, the ones who love too deeply, who feel too much, and who eventually find themselves hollowed out by a sadness that feels less like an emotion and more like a permanent weather system, then you know the specific ache of being a sad lover. You aren't just someone who is unhappy in a relationship. You are someone whose very capacity to love has become inextricably tied to the capacity to suffer. You have learned to equate the intensity of your pain with the sincerity of your devotion, and in doing so, you have built a cathedral out of your own grief. Think of it as the emotional erosion of the soul. Just as a river slowly carves away the stone of a canyon, your habit of loving through sadness has worn down the boundaries of who you are. You no longer know where your partner's trauma ends and your own begins. You have become a professional mourner for a relationship that is still technically alive. You walk through your days with a lump in your throat that you've mistaken for a heartbeat, convinced that if you just hurt a little more, or understand them a little better, or sacrifice a little more of your light, the shadows will finally lift. But the shadows don't lift. They just grow longer. And you eventually realize you've forgotten what it's like to stand in the sun without waiting for the clouds to return. To understand why you love this way, we have to look at the architecture of your childhood, the blueprint that was handed to you before you even knew how to speak the word affection. For many, this sadness is a hand-me-down. It is a legacy of lack. Perhaps you grew up in a home where love was a scarce resource, something that had to be earned, negotiated, or performed. You learned early on that a parent's smile was a fragile thing, easily shattered by their own depression, their own unhealed wounds, or their own chaotic demands. In that environment, your sensitivity wasn't a gift, it was a survival radar. You became hyper-attuned to the atmospheric pressure of the room. You learned to read the micro-shifts in a sigh, the specific sharpness of a cabinet door closing, the heavy silence that preceded a storm. You became a parentified child, a small person tasked with the impossible job of stabilizing an adult's emotional world. And in that process, you made a tragic, unconscious discovery. When you were sad, or when you were helping them with their sadness, you finally felt seen. You found that melancholy connection was the only reliable bridge to the people you needed most. If you were happy and independent, you were ignored. But if you were hurting, or if you were a vessel for their hurt, you were meaningful. You weren't just a child, you were a savior. And so, the wires in your brain were crossed. You began to believe that love isn't a celebration, it's a rescue mission. This brings us to the shadow of the savior complex. As an adult, you are drawn to partners who are the broken project. You don't look for someone to walk beside, you look for someone to carry. You find yourself magnetically attracted to the beautifully tragic, the person with the dark past, the misunderstood soul, the one who pushes everyone else away. Why? Because their darkness feels like home. Their pain is a language you speak fluently. When you meet someone who is whole and healthy, you feel bored, or worse, you feel unnecessary. You don't know how to exist in a space where there is no fire to put out. You feel like a ghost in a room where no one is mourning. But there is a deeper, more painful truth beneath the desire to save others, the mirror of unmet needs. By obsessively focusing on the sadness of your partner, you are effectively distracting yourself from the bottomless well of your own neglected self. It is far easier to spend 10 years trying to fix someone else's shattered confidence than it is to spend 10 minutes sitting with your own feeling of being unlovable. Your sad love is a sophisticated avoidance strategy. You pour your life force into their cup, hoping that by making them whole, you will finally have permission to be happy too. But you are pouring into a cup that has no bottom. This creates a psychological phenomenon known as an ambiguous loss. In a traditional loss, like a death, there is a funeral. There is a clear ending and a process of grieving. But in a sad love, the person is still there. They are sitting across from you at dinner. They are sleeping in the bed next to you. Yet the version of them that could love you back, the version that is present and joyful, is gone, or perhaps was never really there. You are grieving a living person. You are in a state of chronic mourning, waiting for a return that never happens. You become addicted to the breadcrumbs of hope, those tiny, rare moments where they show a flash of warmth or a glimmer of change. You live for those 5 minutes of connection, and you use them to justify the 5 months of emotional starvation that preceded them. You tell yourself, see, they can be the person I need, ignoring the fact that those moments are the exception, not the rule. This is the gambler's fallacy of the heart. You have already invested so much tears, so much time, and so much of your identity into this person that the cost of leaving feels higher than the cost of staying and suffering. You want a return on investment for your agony. You want the universe to say, you hurt so much that you've earned a happy ending. But love isn't a transaction, and trauma isn't a down payment for future peace. The longer you stay in the waiting room of the soul, the more you lose the ability to remember who you were before the waiting began. You might notice that your body has started to keep the score. The sadness isn't just in your mind anymore. It's in the permanent tension in your shoulders, the shallow way you breathe, the emotional fatigue that sleep can't touch. You are living in a state of constant sympathetic nervous system activation. You are always on edge, waiting for the next emotional crisis, the next withdrawal of affection, the cold shoulder. This is relational trauma, and it changes the very chemistry of your brain. You lose your dopamine baseline. You no longer find joy in small things, a sunset, a good meal, a conversation with a friend, because your system is tuned only to the high-stakes drama of your relationship. You have become an adrenaline junkie of grief. And then comes the isolation of the martyr. You stop talking to your friends about your relationship because you're tired of the look in their eyes, the pity, the frustration, the why don't you just leave? So you stop sharing. You become a secret keeper. You protect the very person who is hurting you, weaving a narrative for the outside world that justifies their behavior. You say they had a hard childhood, or they're stressed at work, or they're just like that. You become a defense attorney for your own misery. This isolation is the invisible wall that locks you inside the sadness. Once you are alone with the pain, with no external perspective to tether you to reality, the sadness becomes the only reality there is. You start to believe in the myth of the soulmate in pain. You've watched too many movies and read too many books that romanticize the idea that true love is something you have to fight for, bleed for, and die for. You've internalized the toxic idea that the more it hurts, the more it matters. You think that quiet, easy love is shallow or fake. You have mistaken conflict for chemistry and anxiety for passion. You are trapped in a cycle where you feel most alive when you are at your lowest point, because the intensity of the reconciliation feels like a drug. But what if the fighting isn't a sign of how much you care? What if it's just a sign of how much you're breaking? We have to ask the hard truth question. Who would you be if you were not the sad one? For many of you, this identity has become a safety blanket. As much as it hurts, the sadness is familiar. It's predictable. You know how to navigate the dark. The light, however, is terrifying. The light requires you to be seen, to be vulnerable without the shield of a crisis, and to take responsibility for your own joy. Being a victim of love is a passive state. It's something that happens to you. But being a participant in a healthy life requires an active, terrifying agency that you may have never been allowed to develop. You are holding on to the sadness because you are afraid that if you let it go, there will be nothing left of you. You are afraid that you are just a collection of scars held together by a weary hope.
But look closer at those scars. Each one is a testament to your hyper-resilience. You have survived emotional winters that would have frozen anyone else solid. You have a capacity for depth that is rare and beautiful, but it is currently being used to dig a hole for yourself rather than to plant a garden. You are a master of empathy, but you have turned that empathy outward so aggressively that there is none left for the person in the mirror. You are a lighthouse that has turned its light inward, blinding itself, while the ships it was meant to guide are crashing into the rocks in the distance. We need to talk about the threshold of self-erosion. There is a point in every sad love where you stop being a person and start being a function. You are the validator, the listener, the caregiver, the buffer. But where is the you? If we took away your partner's